Presenting our podcast, Got Milk, the Indian Dairy Context, brought to you by Shunya Agritech, India's first animal nutrition and well-being focused organization. Say hello to your hosts, Gir and Sahil.
Right. Let's dive deep into Maharashtra's climate in 2022. We've got this report. It was put together by the India Meteorological Department and the government of Maharashtra.
Yeah.
And it's full of data, tons of analysis.
Right.
Turns out Maharashtra had its 14th warmest year on record.
Wow.
Which is pretty interesting. But here's the thing.
Okay.
It wasn't like this even heat across the entire state. There were different districts, different seasons, experienced some really interesting variations.
Yeah, that's what's so fascinating about these regional climate trends, right? It's not just the big picture. We're kind of zooming in and seeing how those global changes are actually playing out, at the local level. And for a region like Maharashtra, where agriculture is so important, understanding these local nuances, these little differences, it's really key to adapting and thriving, in the face of these changes.
Yeah. So let's break down what the report says about temperature trends. I was surprised to learn that even like a small increase, like the 0.3 degrees Celsius above the long-term average that Maharashtra saw in 2022 can actually have like noticeable effects.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And you have to remember, we're talking about averages here, right? So within that overall warming trend, there are going to be periods of like much more extreme heat, especially during those already hot months. And actually, the report highlights August and December as being particularly warm in 2022, as well as that whole pre-monsoon season.
Wow.
So think about that impact that extended heat can have on, everything from water resources to energy consumption. All of these things are interconnected.
That makes sense. It's not just about the average temperature. It's also about how much longer those hotter periods might be getting or more intense.
More frequent,
longer duration. But the report also talks about minimum temperatures too, right?
Yes. And that's where we see another really interesting trend. So while the annual maximum temperature was slightly above average, the minimum temperature actually saw a much more significant jump, a full 0.5 degrees Celsius warmer.
Wow.
Again, might not sound like a lot, but it actually makes 2022 the 10th warmest year in terms of minimum temperatures since 1901. So the shift in minimum temperatures is something scientists are really looking at closely globally because it can impact everything from like how plants grow to nighttime energy demand, when people are using air conditioning and things like that.
So it's not just about how hot it gets during the day, but how much it cools down at night.
Exactly, yeah.
And you mentioned that this warming trend is especially noticeable in certain parts of Maharashtra.
Yeah, that's right. So central Maharashtra saw minimum temperature anomalies between 0.5 degrees Celsius and 1 degree Celsius. Wow.
Which is significant. And what's really, I think, crucial to understand here is that these aren't just like abstract numbers. We're talking about things that are actually affecting people's lives, their, livelihoods, and the ecosystems that they depend on.
Now, looking at the long-term trends, the report shows a significant increase of 0.58 degrees Celsius per 100 years in the average annual temperature from 1901 to 2022.
Right.
And it seems that the increase is even more pronounced for maximum temperatures compared to minimum temperatures.
Yeah, that's an interesting pattern that climate scientists are really trying to tease apart, not just in Maharashtra, but globally. And it's likely a combination of different factors, right? So things like changes in land use, how much urbanization is happening, and of course, that broader trend of global warming that we're all experiencing. But understanding those specific drivers in Maharashtra.
That's really crucial for developing those targeted strategies, to really mitigate those rising temperatures.
It's like a giant puzzle.
It is.
And each piece of data helps us see the bigger picture more clearly. But before we move on to the next section, I'm curious about those top 5 warmest years that you mentioned earlier.
Oh, yeah. So the report lists those top 5 warmest years on record for Maharashtra. And it might surprise you to learn that the hottest year wasn't that long ago. 2019 holds that top spot. So this really highlights the fact that climate change isn't some like distant threat. Its impacts are being felt today in very real ways.
That's definitely something to keep in mind as we continue to explore the report.
Absolutely.
Now, I know rainfall in Maharashtra can be a bit unpredictable.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
The report mentions that the southwest monsoon is the primary rainy season, accounting for like a whopping 88.4% of the annual rainfall.
Right, so it's a big deal.
So what happened during that crucial period in 2022?
Well, it turns out 2022 was a year of some pretty interesting contrasts. So out of the 36 districts in Maharashtra, 21 of them experienced what's considered excess rainfall, which is between 20 and 59% above the average.
Wow.
While the remaining 15 districts had what we call normal rainfall. But here's where it gets interesting. Remember how we were talking about that warmer pre-monsoon season?
Yes, with those high temperatures kind of lingering.
Yeah, exactly. And that actually led to below normal rainfall in June.
Oh, wow.
Which is really significant because, many farmers really rely on those monsoon rains to, start planting their crops.
Right.
So a delayed or weak monsoon can actually have this ripple effect on that whole agricultural cycle.
That makes me think about all the people whose livelihoods are tied to, the timing and intensity of these monsoon rains.
Right, absolutely.
It must have been a stressful time for them wondering if those rains were even going to arrive.
Yeah.
On time. But it sounds like the monsoon eventually picked up.
It did, yeah. So after that kind of slow start, the monsoon really made a comeback. It delivered above normal rainfall in July, August, September, and even spilled over into October. So, it's these sorts of variations that really make understanding regional climate patterns so important.
So even though June was drier than usual, the rest of the monsoon season kind of like overcompensated.
In a way, yeah, you could say that.
Wow, that's quite a swing.
It is. It is.
What kind of impact did that have on things like water resources or agriculture?
That's it. That's a great question, and that's actually something we're going to delve into as we continue our deep dive into this report.
Awesome. I'm excited.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got this picture of like a warmer than average year with some pretty big swings in rainfall during that monsoon season. I'm ready to see what the report says about extreme weather events in Maharashtra in 2022.
Let's do it. And keep in mind, we've been talking about averages and overall trends, but those extreme weather events, those are the moments when like things go off the charts.
Yeah.
And they can have a much more immediate and dramatic impact on people's lives.
Right. It's the difference between knowing that temperatures are rising over time and actually like living through a scorching heat wave that lasts for days.
Yeah, that's a great point. And those are the kinds of events that the report really dives into, right? Yeah. So it actually breaks down heavy rainfall events into different categories. Mm-hmm. So you've got those with 64.5 to 115.5 millimeters of rain.
Okay.
Then you've got very heavy rainfall events with 115.6 to 204.4 millimeters.
Right.
And then you've got those really intense, extremely heavy rainfall events, which are anything above 204.4 millimeters.
Right. So even within like heavy rainfall, there's this whole spectrum of intensity.
Absolutely.
I'm starting to see why those distinctions really matter, especially when you think about the impact on like communities and infrastructure.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's not just about how much rain falls, it's also about the duration.
Yeah.
How quickly it falls. Sudden downpour can cause those flash floods, even if the total rainfall amount isn't, super high. So understanding these nuances is crucial for disaster preparedness, response, all of that.
Now, I remember we talked earlier about Mathrin receiving like a staggering 354.2 millimeters of rain on July 1st.
On one day, yeah.
That's just incredible. That much rain in a single day.
Imagine the power of that kind of downpour. And the report highlights several other instances of these extremely heavy rainfall events. And it paints a pretty vivid picture of the challenges that people in Maharashtra faced in 2022. So, for example, on June 26th, areas like Dahanu, Johar, and Thalassery all recorded over 200 millimeters of rain.
Wow.
In just 24 hours.
It's hard to even imagine that much rain falling.
It's hard to fathom.
So quickly.
Yeah.
You start to understand why flooding is such a major concern in those areas.
Absolutely.
Prone to these extreme rainfall events.
And it's not just about the immediate impact, right? It's those longer-term consequences. So flooding can disrupt transportation, damage infrastructure, contaminate water supplies, even displace entire communities. So, the effects can really ripple outward for months, even years after the initial event.
The report also mentions other extreme weather events besides heavy rainfall.
Yeah. So it talks about things like heat waves, cold waves, and lightning thunderstorms. And each of these presents its own set of challenges, for people in Maharashtra.
And what about cold waves?
Okay.
I tend to think of India as a hot country.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious how cold waves would impact Maharashtra.
Yeah, even in a region that's known for its warm climate, those cold waves can have a pretty significant impact, especially on agriculture.
Yeah.
So a sudden drop in temperature can damage crops,
Okay.
particularly those that are sensitive to frost. And for people who aren't used to dealing with that extreme cold, it can be a real shock to the system.
So we're seeing this pattern of extreme events across the spectrum.
Yeah, across the board.
Like heat, cold, intense rainfall.
Yeah, it's a sobering picture.
The report gives a map showing the locations where those major extreme weather events caused significant impacts in 2022.
Right.
It's kind of sobering to see how widespread those impacts are.
Yeah, and what's important to remember is that, each marker on that map represents a community that was affected by these events. So behind those data points are real people whose lives were, disrupted, whose homes were damaged, whose livelihoods were put at risk. And it's a reminder that, we need to go beyond simply documenting these events. We need to translate this knowledge into action, into strategies that actually help communities prepare for and adapt to a future where these events might become even more common.
That's a really powerful point. It's not just about understanding the science of climate change. It's about understanding the human impact,
the human cost,
and finding ways to protect the most vulnerable.
Precisely. And that's why this report is so valuable, right? It's not just a collection of facts and figures. It's a call to action.
Now, we've talked a lot about rainfall.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier that flooding is a major concern, especially for agricultural regions like Maharashtra.
Right.
What does the report tell us about that link between heavy rainfall and flooding?
So the report acknowledges that, flooding can be absolutely devastating, especially for a region that's so reliant on agriculture, right? And it actually dives into some specific data on the impact of floods on kharif crops, which are those that are planted during the monsoon season.
Yes, I'm looking at figure 11 in the report right now.
Okay.
And it shows the district-wise area affected by floods and heavy rains during that kharif season from June to September 2022. It's a really stark visual reminder of how vulnerable agriculture is to these extreme events.
Yeah, and it's not just about that, immediate damage to crops, right? Floods can also disrupt those transportation networks, making it harder to get, goods to market. They can damage infrastructure, leading to, costly repairs. They can even lead to outbreaks of waterborne diseases, which can further impact public health.
So it's like this ripple effect.
Yeah, it's a cascade.
Where the initial impact of the flood then triggers all of these other problems.
And I imagine those ripple effects are felt most acutely by those who are already struggling, right?
Of course.
So, the poorest communities, those who are, maybe living in more vulnerable areas, they're often the ones who are hit the hardest by these kinds of events.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. Those different types of extreme events to their potential impacts on agriculture, infrastructure, public health.
And it's a lot to take in.
Yeah, it is.
But I think you're starting to see how all of this connects back to that bigger picture of climate change that we were talking about earlier.
You're exactly right. These extreme events aren't isolated incidents.
Yeah.
They're part of this larger pattern driven by, a changing climate.
Exactly.
And the more we understand these patterns, the better equipped we'll be to address those challenges that they present.
That's the goal.
This has been incredibly insightful, and I'm eager to hear what else the report reveals.
Me too.
I know we've got more to explore in this deep dive, so let's keep going.
Sounds good.
We've been on quite a journey exploring Maharashtra's climate in 2022.
Yeah, it's been fascinating.
We've seen how those seemingly small shifts in average temperatures can actually signal some pretty significant changes.
Right.
And then you've got those extreme weather events, which really highlight how vulnerable we are to those forces of nature.
What's really struck me is how this report goes beyond simply presenting data, right? It actually connects those data points to, real-world impacts on people's lives. It reminds us that behind every statistic, there's a story, a community that's grappling with the challenges of a changing climate.
It's one thing to hear about, rising temperatures or increased rainfall.
Right.
But when you see those figures translated into, the number of lives lost due to those extreme weather events, it really hits home.
It does, yeah. And the report actually includes a table that lists those major extreme weather events that resulted in fatalities in 2022. And it's a stark reminder that climate change isn't just some abstract concept. It has very real and often tragic consequences.
And makes you think about the people, right?
Yeah.
Behind those numbers, their families, their community.
Absolutely, yeah.
The ripple effects of those losses.
Yeah, and it underscores that urgency of finding ways to better protect those most vulnerable to those extreme events.
Absolutely. Now, the report also emphasizes the need for collaboration, right?
Yes. And think about it. I mean, this report itself is a product of collaboration between the India Meteorological Department and the government of Maharashtra. Right. So, they came together, pooled their expertise, their resources to really paint this comprehensive picture of Maharashtra's climate.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
It really highlights how important it is to break down those silos.
Yeah.
To have different agencies, organizations, all working together towards that common goal.
And it doesn't stop there. The report actually calls for even greater collaboration moving forward. So, it stresses the need to develop those climate action plans tailored to the specific needs of different regions within Maharashtra, right? Because, a one-size-fits-all approach, it's not going to work.
So it's not just about understanding the science. It's also about translating that knowledge into action. Into policies, programs that can actually make a difference.
Yeah, that can make a difference on the ground, exactly.
So investing in early warning systems.
Yes.
So people have more time to prepare for those extreme events.
Absolutely, yeah.
Strengthening infrastructure, promoting more sustainable agricultural practices.
Right, and empowering those communities to really take ownership of their own resilience to, be part of the solution.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember?
I would say it's this. Climate change is happening. Its impacts are being felt right now in places like Maharashtra. But, we're not powerless. We have the knowledge, the tools, the capacity to build a more resilient future. And it starts with understanding those challenges, collaborating across those different sectors, and, most importantly, taking action.
Beautifully said. It's been incredible exploring this report with you. And for you listening, remember, keep those questions coming. Stay curious about the world around you. Until next time, happy deep diving.
Hope you enjoyed this episode of Got Milk, the Indian Dairy Context. Subscribe to the podcast. And a reminder, this episode was brought to you by Shunya Agritech, India's first animal nutrition and well-being focused organization. Thank you, and see you in the next episode.